Well, hello there, all you aliens, robots and nerds and geeks and what have you not. We're going to do a reaction by request from my Discord, and it's like the first worst operating system, and it's actually the author that has given it to me. Let's see what the bearded god of gingerness have to say to us today.
Using your computer and just something goes wrong and you think, damn, this is probably the worst operating system that has ever been made. Well, you might be wrong, because in this video we've compiled the list of the 5 operating systems that might be the very worst things to ever be installed on somebody's computer. And for this list, we are going to be going in order from bad to worst. Now, this is obviously subjective. If there's something that has been left out of this list, I would love to hear about it down below. But
already here, I can say there's a lot of operating systems that's being left out, and the ones on the list are not really that bad.
For now, this is what we got for you. Starting off with Lindows, now known as Linspire. Lindows was first started in 2001 with the goal to make a Linux distribution designed to compete with Windows, offering a very similar UI and allowing you to run Windows applications.
And I will already stop here because Lindows was Ubuntu before Ubuntu. Lindows was one of the first ever operating systems of Linux to be sold in physical computer stores and warehouses where customers could go in and buy them off the shelf. They were also one of the first Linux distributions to be sold on physical hardware you could buy in said store. And Linspire did expose a lot of people to Linux. Just putting it out there, it was not a bad system. It has like an intuitive, easy to understand click and run system that worked really well. Like I said, it was kind of Ubuntu before Ubuntu. What was bad about Linspire or Lindows was the management. The CEO and management, they were batshit crazy. One of the managers, CEO or something like that, he was secretly in love with Ubuntu and wanted to work for Ubuntu and all that fucking shit. Why they migrated over to an Ubuntu base at one point. The CEO, the guy that did the mp3.org or com or something like that, was really shady and whatnot. The management was amazingly bad for it, but the distro of itself was doing a lot of the things that Ubuntu then started to do when Ubuntu came out.
This being done through Wine and their tool called Click to Run. Now, to its credit, this may not have been the very first software manager in Linux, but it was one of the first that gave you a graphical interface to allow you to browse for various packages and discover new applications.
No, that's a lie. Debian had that before Lindows, Linspire. There were graphical user interfaces for package managers all the way in the 90s. What Linspire did, or I keep calling them Linspire because they got into a court battle with Windows over Lindows. What Linspire did was they had a web storefront where you just clicked on a button. Like, think about open source software, think about the Snap Store where you just click a link and then it opens up the interface and install the program. It was so fucking convenient for the users.
And that sounds great, right? Well, Click to Run was not a free service. It costs around $20 a month for the basic version and $50 for the premium version.
The last part of the lifespan, no.
On top of that, it heavily advertised running Windows apps, but their solution to running apps was just Wine.
Just like it is today. It's just like it is today. That's a really weak argument.
And we all know how well Wine actually works, let alone in 2002. So there was just little point in paying for Lindows when you could just use basically any free Linux distribution.
So you didn't have to pay for Click and Run. I used Lindows without paying for Click and Run. You had to pay for the distribution. You could not run Lindows or Linspire without paying for it. Click and Run was an option.
To be fair though, at this time, commercial Linux distributions were a lot more common even on the desktop. At this time, you could go to the store and get like a boxed copy of Red Hat
and Lindows/Linspire.
Linux 9.0. However, even then there were better options. Now you may be wondering, where is Lindows today? Well, Microsoft is tempted to sue them for the name.
No, they succeeded to sue them. They didn't attempt. They sued them over the Lindows name and got into legal battles, and that's why it became Linspire.
But would later buy it for $20 million, causing a rename to Linspire. And personally, for a business venture to basically rip off a Microsoft name and get them to pay you for it is definitely a a W in my opinion.
No, that's shady as fuck. Why I said the CEO was shady. There are so much story about Lindows and Linspire that, and the story is not about the distribution, it's about the CEO. By the way, Microsoft didn't buy Lindows. Like, Microsoft didn't buy Lindows. They reached a settlement. I don't know why they said that on that. Lindows wins in court. Yeah, they win. They won. But they changed the name. The part of the deal that they won was that they had to change the name. I don't know why he said. I could be have heard wrong, but I think he said that Windows won or bought Lindows. They didn't.
Later, buy it for $20 million.
Yeah, they make a deal. Windows will pay $30 to end legal battle. Yeah, that's a settlement. That's not buying it. That's a settlement.
$1 million, causing a rename to Linspire. And personally, for a business venture, to a W in my opinion. Later, the community would make a free version called FreeSpire, but that would later be discontinued.
No. That was not the community. That was the folk. So look at Linspire or FreeSpire as what Fedora is for Red Hat. It was done in-house. The community could just help out with it. But it was mostly done in-house.
After the release of Linspire 6.0 and FreeSpire 2.0 in 2001. Until they came back in 2019.
Yeah, not the same folks. This was bought up by one of the worst fucking distribution makers to ever live and try to make a bug of Linux. Like, Eston can rant for days and days about this dude.
But all of these distros are just Ubuntu respins that aren't really actually that good either. They no longer have any unique features. And they seem to change the desktop environments with every single release.
Again, look into the company that bought that license. You can make a whole video. Like, I actually want, like, I know the author will see this. If you want to make a really good video, go and research the guy that bought the name for Linspire and FreeSpire, because he bought both license for both name. He's basically was, as Esnick calls it, a corrupt used car salesman with Linux distributions.
With FreeSpire 8 shipping XFCE, 8.2 shipping Plasma, and 9 shipping GNOME. So at least when it comes to the world of Linux, this is easily argued to be one of the worst.
No.
Granted, I have...
I could name 20 distributions that were way worse, did way worse thing, was way more buggy, that made way less sense, that was actually... Like, Cisco Linux, or SCO, they were, like, trying to sue fucking other companies and what have you not. I don't know how I can say this in a smart way or in a way that's nice, but Linspire was not a bad distribution by far. Well, not the original versions of it. It was Ubuntu before Ubuntu. What was the issue? Was the CEO being a batshit crazy person?
I've covered some other distributions that definitely put up a competing fight. Next, we go back to the year of my birth, 1996. JavaSoft, under Sun Microsystems, the company behind Java, was trying to showcase a bunch of use cases for the Java language in JVM. So they decided to develop an OS that booted straight into JVM that could run on anything from TVs, routers, pagers, basically any embedded computer. And because it was running on JVM, it could run on the architecture that JVM supported, including ARM, PowerPC, and x86. It was somewhat impressive with 256 kilobytes of RAM and 512 kilobytes of ROM. You would get a microkernel, a graphics and windowing system, and more. And it also came...
Which was, at that time, way more advanced than any Linux distribution, by the way.
...with a web browser called Hot Java Browser. Now that all sounds great. Of course, it's on this list, so it has a problem. Java applications would run over your network, and this was the 90s. On top of all that, we just know how slow Java is in general. So this resulted in one of the slowest and most painful operating systems to use of all time. Because of this, adoption was very bad with only a few hardware releases such as Sun Java Station, so Java OS would eventually be canned in 2001 with Java Me being the new replacement. Also,
yeah, but Java OS was mostly meant for the IT world, not meant as a desktop. Java OS was also what you will call a technical exercise. It was not meant to be Microsoft Windows or Linux or Mac OS and stuff like that.
So something funny, one of the 7 team members was a co-architect on Copland, another OS that we will touch on a little bit later. Now, this operating system is really obscure. I did have trouble finding information on this, so big thank you to Cameron for his video where he covers it on an actual Sun JavaScript computer that he happened to get his hands on. Now for the operating system that you were probably thinking of when you clicked on this video, and one that is actually near and dear to my heart, and that is Windows Me, or Windows Millennium.
Yeah, it's not Me, it is Millennium Edition.
Growing up, I did start on Windows 95. That's the computer we had in our house, but definitely in my early years, I spent the most time on a Windows Me machine.
I didn't. I installed it and uninstalled it. Go away, bit shit. Yeah, I went back to Windows 98 and then Windows 2000.
Primarily because it was my grandma's machine, and she would have a bunch of those like discs that you could get at 7-Eleven, and they had like 50 flash games on it. I spent quite a bit of time on that. This came out in the year 2000, was the final Windows edition based on DOS. And this sort of acted as a... Oh, my thing died. That's the problem with traveling. This was a transitional operating system between the X9 series based on DOS and the NT series, which powered Windows 2000 and would go on to power Windows XP. While this was a quite innovative version of Windows that would add many of the staples we know today, such as System Restore, automatic updates, and universal plug and play, Windows Me would be known more for its crazy instability issues and constant blue screen.
So Windows Millennium Edition was made for, or some call it Multimedia Edition. The whole spiel with ME was multimedia. It was Web 1.5 or 2.0. I can't remember what they were built for, but they were built for online multimedia consumption and home use of multimedia consumption. Because in the late 90s, early 2000, playback of video, audio, DVDs, CD-ROMs, and stuff like that on your computer became a massive thing. It was a really big thing, multimedia consumption in that area, and that's why they did ME. Like, I will agree 1000% of all the Windows releases to ever be made. This is the worst. The fucking worst.
The reason it was so unstable is due to its transitional nature and development hell before it. Windows 98 was supposed to be the last version of Windows to use the DOS-based 9X kernel, and this sparked Windows Neptune, which was codenamed for Windows 2000-based successor to Windows 98. However, Windows Neptune would be merged into Windows Odyssey to form Windows Whistler, which would later become Windows XP. So they would start working on Windows Millennium instead and rushed it out in less than a year of development, which resulted in a super rushed, buggy, unstable product, which would be almost universally dunked on.
Yeah, you also have to remember back in the 90s, the reason why they did this is that Windows was not the king. Or they were the king, but they were not the default king as they is today. They were still big, but not as big as they is today. At this time, they still competed with OS2. They still competed with Apple, Macintosh. They still competed with BOS. Yes, BOS. You've probably not heard about that. The spiritual successor is Haigo. They needed something because BOS was light year ahead of of Windows 98, basically. Apple was light years ahead of Windows 98. OS 2, Warp 4, whatever they were at that time, was light years ahead of Windows 98. So they needed something to keep the customers. And that's why they did this. Experiment and keep the customers. You get what I'm saying here. So it was a band-aid, gaffer tape it together and put it out of the house kind of issue, yeah.
Now before we move on, I do need to thank our sponsor, something that will work far better. So from there, the next operating system is the famous Red Star OS, the official operating system of the People's Republic of North Korea.
Yep.
Before Red Star, this country generally ran Red Hat Linux or Windows XP, but then came along Red Star OS. And it is hard to get information on Red Star OS just due to the nature of it and how secretly the North Korean regime is, but we know versions 1 and 2 resembled Windows XP, while 3 and 4 had a more Mac OS inspired feel. Newer versions seem to be based on Fedora with a heavily modified desktop environment based on KDE Plasma. Booting into Red Star OS 3.0, we have a very Mac OS-like installer for the operating system, and then you actually get into a moderately good-looking...
There are so many great channels out there where you can get photos about Red Star OS. Why the fuck you spending Outlaw?
System once installed, so it seems all is well. But what makes this one of the worst operating systems of all time? Well, that's because it's used by the North Korean government to restrict their people.
Yeah, that though. This is the whole argument of people thinking the OS is an entity. It's a self-thinking entity. It's not the OS's fault that North Korea is doing these things with it. This is like a low-key fucking way of pushing blame away from the North Korean government into the operating system. The operating system is only bad because the people that develop it is bad. The OS have no concept of what is right or wrong. That will make every car in the world the worst drivable thing on earth, and the thing that should be banned the most because there's more people driving other people over in cars than anything else. So therefore, because humans do crazy shit with cars, every car should be banned because they're the worst rolling machinery to ever be made. I'm sorry, but this is stupidity, and I really hate this thing. Red Star OS didn't crawl up on a server one day and say, you know what? These North Korean peasants should not be allowed to watch Pornhub today. It would be me like blaming these carrots here. If or me go into court and say, well, I didn't stab someone in the eye with that's the carrot's fault. The carrots just stop fucking jumping into people's fucking eyes. Not my fault. Yeah, I pick it up and I was, but it's the carrot's fault. They did it. I'm sorry. Red Star OS as an operating system, as a technology, one of the bad things is that it's tracking the living shit out of you. I hope they didn't mention that. Like, it's tracking you way more, a lot, which is a bad thing. But the code itself, is not bad. This is not like an AI that is out, like it's not Skynet.
It ships with its own web browser forked from Firefox called Nayara, I think, which is not only proven to be vulnerable, but also, of course, restricts users in North Korea from access.
Yeah, that's the developers putting that in. This version of Firefox didn't make itself.
Many of the websites in the open web. It also has backdoors and watermarked files to help the government link things back to individual users. It allows the North Korea...
Again, that's bad. Blame the developers and the people making it. Red Star OS didn't do this itself.
Korean government to get into the operating system and delete files that they don't like. And there are other vulnerabilities such as allowing remote code execution, and the OS prevents the use.
What I would say this is probably the most unsecure OS to ever exist. Unsecure. And the most intrusive to your privacy OS to ever exist. That would be the correct statement.
From actually tampering with the operating system. There is a way to actually remove all the malware on Red Star OS, and Mental Outlaw actually has a really good video on how to do that. If you want to learn more about this operating system, I do recommend checking out the videos from both Mental Outlaw and Some Ordinary Gamers. Both have great videos on this subject. And now finally, we have Copland. This is one that I would personally consider to maybe be the worst operating system of all time. Now, Apple had a problem in the 90s. macOS Classic was overall a flawed design, and to explain why, let's talk about how multitasking works. Modern operating systems, including Windows, modern Mac, and Linux, use multitasking systems called preemptive multitasking, where a scheduler allocates your CPU time for different tasks.
Every OS in the 90s, even Linux had this fucking issue. I'm sorry to put it out there. This was not this is a Copland or Mac OS issue. No, every OS in the 90s, beside maybe FreeBSD, not FreeBSD, BOS and some versions of OS2, all had issues with a few things. Any form of multitasking, preemptively or not preemptively multitasking, memory management or I can't remember what the fuck it's called, but protected memory. Mac OS's biggest issue was the memory. Windows' biggest issue in the 90s and why they went over to the NT kernel, protected memory. This here was not so much the biggest issue as protected memory. I don't know where they got this information from, but yes, multitasking was a massive issue for every operating system in the 90s. And Linux was probably the worst multitasking operating system of the 90s, because Linux was just a Barbie in the 90s.
Tasks on the OS depending on how important they are, and automatically manages everything going on. Classic versions of Mac OS were using something called cooperative multitasking, where processes would voluntarily give up CPU time for other processes on the computer to run, which means one poorly designed application could take down your entire system and cause major instability. This made the later versions of macOS Classic incredibly unstable.
Yeah, and another reason for that you will understand if you know a little bit about OS design, is that is why we have kernels that are basically layered like an onion. So most operating systems back in the 90s, when you executed a program, you ran that directly into the kernel. There was no there was no protected memory, protected processes and stuff like that. When you ran a program in 95, Windows Classic, and so on and so on, I think Linux was the only one of the few operating systems that actually have like some form of shielding from the kernel and its program back then. So because you ran the program directly on the hardware, you can also say, if it fucked up, it fucked everything up. If one program crashed, everything crashed. And that is why nowadays we have the kernel, and then we have like a protective layer, and every processes and every use case that we do is protected, and one is its own protected memory state and process. I'm really simplifying it here, by the way. So if Notepad crashes, it don't take your whole system with you. But back in the 90s, every operating system was based just running everything directly on the kernel, directly onto the bare metal with no protection and stuff like that. I will come with the conclusion.
Especially System 7 and onward. So Apple needed a replacement quick because Windows 9X was already technologically superior, and other options like Windows NT, BOS, and even Linux and Warp were already out.
Linux was not that much better back then. The only thing Linux had forward in the 90s was protected memory. That's the only thing. Warp was better.
Outpacing Apple. They tried collaborating under IBM with the IntelliGent project to make a more modern foundation for macOS, but those efforts collapsed. So they would start working on Copland, the very new replacement for macOS. This would be built in a new kernel-based OS with preemptive...
Kernel-based? Every OS is kernel-based. Every OS have a kernel.
Multitasking, and would use a container...
Microkernel-based, I think they meant.
...called Blue Box to support legacy code. Now, Copland was supposed to come out in 1996, and they would go and do a developer demo earlier in the year, but it barely worked. They would then promise more features to account for delays, causing more delays, further causing a loop where they were causing more delays, promising more features. The cycle continued. Now, later in the year in 1996, they actually released a developer preview, but it was so buggy, the operating system would crash just sitting on idle, with absolutely nothing happening.
Another thing here is, Copland was a development branch. It was not the official release. Like, think about Ubuntu's development branch. Copland was not meant to be used by the populace for mass consumption. So saying this is the worst operating system to ever been made is a little bit disingenuous, because this was not sold on stores. This is like saying that the worst ever Linux distribution is every fucking development branch of any Linux distribution.
So Apple would eventually completely scrap the project and buy out Next for Next Step, which would form into Mac OS X and eventually Mac OS that we know today. And if you do want to learn more why I think Copland is probably one of the worst operating systems in the world, I do recommend you check out the Science Elf's video, The Development Disaster Behind Mac OS.
Yeah, development is... Copland was not meant to be mass...
And Paul's Crap has a bunch of video where he actually checks out old development CDs for Copland.
Yeah, development CDs. Yes, here's a fucking newsflash for any software developer in the world, operating systems or not. If it's a development branch, they are all shitty. You don't have a development branch that is better than the fucking release. Then it's a release candidate. Okay? I'm going to stop. So what I'm going to be a little bit harsh here. I would say most of this video is BS. You cannot use Copland as a excuse for a bad operating system when the only people to really have used Copland, for example, is developers. Internal developers in Apple. You couldn't go to a fucking store and buy an Apple PC with Copland on it. That makes it uncategorically really not a bad operating system, because it was not mass produced for the populace, which is a new word I like to use apparently. Linspire, there are so many gaps and not understanding about Linspire. It should not even be, and here's the thing, Linspire was not bad. Linspire didn't blow up all your systems. Linspire introduced so many people to Linux. The bad thing was the management. Linspire was probably one of the best OSs of its time on a technical level. What's the other one we have here? Java OS was not meant to be a replacement for Windows and blah, 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 blah. So you could debate, was it a bad OS? Because if you look at the target group, basically Java servers or Sun Spark servers and stuff like that, which were meant to be used for development people. Probably bad for them also. But was it like one of the worst ever operating system in the world? Like I could mention a lot of other fucking systems. I could mention some Windows releases that was worse than this one here. Then we have Windows ME is probably one of the only ones on this list where I will say, yeah, I agree 1000%. Then we have a sponsor. Red Star OS completely misunderstanding what's going on. Blaming, like so here's the thing, there's really nothing wrong with Red Star OS. It's not crashing all the time. It's not, exploding your hardware. It's not only running one or two programs. The big issue with Red Star OS is the people that made it and use it. And the backdoors and the naughtiness that they put into it. That's not a Red Star OS issue. That's a governmental development studio issue. And Copland are development branch. I know this dude that did this is doing his own Linux distribution. That would be me taking a non-released in-house, not even beta version, but slapped together with sticks and stones and gaffer tape release of his OS and putting it in and plastering it as a fully released to consumer new OS. Again, this was not meant. It was meant in the future to become a mass-produced OS. And when release candidate 1 and the full release, if that came out, then we could start to criticize it. So you're sitting here and saying that one of the 5 worst operating systems on Earth is an unfinished product. Hey, Sherlock, of course it's a fucking bad OS. Because it's an unfinished product. This dude, and he will get so angry at me right now, this dude has to stop making scripts. Every script I've seen from this dude is full with fucking errors, and it's the research is half-assed, and a lot of opinion is put into it. See you all later. Bye-bye.